Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Sunday, August 3rd, day 667 of the war. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military correspondent, Emanuel Fabian. Hi, Manny. Thanks for joining me on this Tisha B'Av day.
Hi, Amanda. Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov. Videos published recently by Hamas and Islamic Jihad show emaciated Israeli hostages Evyatar David and Rom Braslavski, even while U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff said that Hamas is ready to demilitarize. The terror group, of course, denies this is the case, and hostage release negotiations continue to be stalled. However, in the northern Gaza Strip's Beit Hanoun, the IDF announced yesterday that it has defeated Hamas's Beit Hanoun battalion. Manny was there last week and will fill us in on what he saw. Manny was also inside southern Lebanon and will hear the IDF's assessment of Hezbollah right now. However, as the fighting continues in the Gaza Strip with no end in sight, we'll also learn about how some soldiers of the Nahal infantry brigade were disciplined for insubordination after refusing to return to fight. All this and more when we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military correspondent, Emanuel Fabian. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad terror group on Thursday published a propaganda video of hostage Rom Braslavski, whom they're holding captive in the Gaza Strip since October 7th, 2023. The terror group claimed that the 6-minute video was recorded days before it lost contact with the captors holding Braslavski and alleged that the hostage's fate is unknown. The family did not approve the full release of the propaganda video, rather only a still, which shows Braslavski, who is 21, looking pale, emaciated, lying on the ground in an unknown location in Gaza. But Manny will fill us in on a second propaganda video from Hamas, which was released Friday, in which hostage Evyatar David appears pale, emaciated. His family approved the full video for publication yesterday and said it showed he was being deliberately starved. So, Manny, tell us what you saw.
So this is, again, another shocking video published by Hamas, much like the others that we've seen in the past. But this video really shows that Evyatar David is not in a good state. You can see he is extremely skinny. He's lost a lot of weight. He's in a tunnel, and the conditions do not look good at all. What he says in the video, it's really hard to tell whether or not this is coming from him or if it's something that Hamas has directed him to say. We can never know in these cases. I mean, he says things like he refers to himself as a prisoner rather than a hostage. So clearly that was dictated by Hamas, but it's unclear what else was. But he describes in the video sort of saying how he hasn't had food to eat in days, and what he has been eating has been lentils and rice and not much else. What is curious in the video is that you can see a Hamas operative actually handing him a tin of food, but the arm of the Hamas operative is, you can see the Hamas members not starving. Clearly, it's not as thin as Evyatar's arm, and we just hope that he'll be released soon and not have to continue suffering through that. And also important to remember, he's not the only hostage in Gaza. There are at least 19 others who are believed to be alive in Gaza and likely in similar conditions, really, really terrible conditions.
All of this is happening, of course, as the hostage release negotiations have stalled. But the IDF declared yesterday that it had defeated Hamas's Beit Hanoun battalion. It's the 5th time that the IDF is operating in the town of Beit Hanoun, which is located in the northeastern edge of the Gaza Strip, just across from the Israeli city of Sderot that was so hard hit on October 7th, 2023. Now, Manny, you were there last week, and at that point, you were speaking with one of the commanders, Colonel Netanel Shamaka. He's the commander of the Givati infantry brigade, and at that point, they were projecting that the defeat would be within the coming days, if not a week, because at that point, they expected that they had only a handful of Hamas operatives really active in this location. So can you really call it a battalion at this point? What is happening here?
Exactly. I was going to say calling it a battalion is a little disingenuous. They were a battalion on October 7th. Before October 7th, each of the Hamas battalions in Gaza had over 1,000 operatives, of course. 24 battalions, 30,000 operatives spread across. So you can do the math. But Beit Hanoun, the army operated in there many, many times. I mean, there were 5 main offensives, but there were other smaller operations on the outskirts and small raids here and there. And the army never really managed to completely defeat the operatives there. And these operatives that were there were actually holed up the entire time. So the army had surrounded it. So when the latest offensive was launched and the army surrounded Beit Hanoun, they also reached these tunnels, main tunnel network that would lead out of Beit Hanoun, so towards Jabalia to the south and towards Beit Lahia to the west. And this time the army was able to actually dig down and cut off these tunnels to prevent these remaining. They estimated when this offensive was launched more than a month ago that there was maybe 20 or 30 or a few dozen. One estimate put around 80 operatives remaining there. And sort of over these few weeks, the army has engaged in combat with them in strikes and eliminated basically all of them. When we were there last week, Shamaka told us, the Givati commander told us that they estimated there were 4 or 5 remaining operatives in all of Beit Hanoun, and that all of the major tunnels had already been destroyed. One interesting thing we were able to see was that when the army was looking for these tunnels, in one case the combat engineers dug down, they dropped an explosive charge inside the tunnel to sort of clear it. And they didn't realize actually until they sent a drone down that they had actually killed several operatives inside, among them a Hamas company commander who had been wanted since October 7th, but wanted for a very long time. And basically, almost by accident, they killed him along with the platoon commander and several other operatives. And that left with the 4 or 5. And then over the weekend, we saw 3 Hamas operatives surrender to troops, and they told the army that another member who was with them had also been killed. So the chances are now that there are essentially 0, maybe 1 Hamas operative remaining in all of Beit Hanoun, and all of the tunnels have been raised. Pretty much every single building in Beit Hanoun has also been raised in the process. The battalion commander, not that he's commanding anybody at this point, actually fled. So a while ago, the army claimed to have killed him. Then he was spotted alive during the ceasefire. When the latest offensive was launched, he did manage to escape Beit Hanoun. We can't say where he is now because, of course, the army is still looking for him. There was an attempt to target him several weeks ago, but that was unsuccessful. But I mean, the bottom line is that Beit Hanoun is no longer posing a threat to the Israeli border towns of Sderot and Niram and the others in that area.
I just want to emphasize one of the things you said that Shamaka said, and I'm just going to quote him actually. And he said, maybe 10 buildings will remain standing when we finish, which belong to civilians, and there are no tunnel entrances in their homes. Meaning this tunnel network that they found under Beit Hanoun was so vast and so well organized that only about 10 homes did not have an entrance to it. And it was so connected that it connected the Beit Hanoun city with Beit Lahia. It connected to Jabalia to the south. And it had all the commanders of Hamas's homes connected to it. It had schools, medical clinics, other civilian sites. It was just phenomenal to read how vast it is. And the army is now claiming that it has basically demolished all of it.
That's correct. I think it is perhaps one of the most fortified areas of Gaza by Hamas, which is why it took the army a very long time to actually get through it. And I'll even note that in the previous times when the army went in, they didn't have all the intelligence on the tunnels. So each operation, they captured operatives, they interrogated them, they found maps, they found computers with information on them, and then that led to more intelligence on the actual tunnel network itself. And eventually the army was able to uncover all of it. So if you ask why the army didn't demolish the tunnels the first time it went in, it's because it didn't actually know where all these tunnels were. And it was a very extensive tunnel network there. Every Hamas commander from under his home or his yard had an entrance going in. A main route passed under all the civilian infrastructure there, and indeed pretty much every building in the area was either running above the tunnel or had an entrance to the tunnel or was used by Hamas for other reasons. They used to would store weapons in them or booby trap them. So those 10 buildings that are remaining are essentially buildings that had nothing to do with Hamas in the area. But as you can see, only 10 out of several hundred buildings. I don't think I noted this in the story, but around 600 structures were demolished in Beit Hanoun.
Let's go to a short break. And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military correspondent, Emanuel Fabian. So, Manny, you had a busy week last week, and you were not only in the Gaza Strip, you were also in the far north in southern Lebanon, where you visited one of the 5 posts that the IDF has kept since the November ceasefire, November 27, 2024. Now, what's interesting is, in spite of the ceasefire, or as part of the ceasefire, the IDF has continued the pressure on Hezbollah. And since the beginning of the ceasefire, the IDF said it has carried out over 500 airstrikes against Hezbollah targets, killing at least 230 operatives. So we're hearing now from the IDF that it believes that it has created enough pressure on Hezbollah to potentially disarm. Tell us what you saw.
So that's Israel's goal here, is to have Hezbollah disarm. And the IDF is seeing now in Lebanon growing calls for Hezbollah to disarm and give up its weapons. We're seeing this from members of Lebanon's parliament and others calling for this. And we've heard, of course, Hezbollah's opinions on the matter. They've said they'll never give up their arms. But the army does actually believe that if it can continue this pressure over time, continue to prevent Hezbollah from regrouping and rearming at a sort of the rate of which Israel carries out the strikes, to prevent them from regrouping is more than they're able to regroup, it can eventually lead to Hezbollah disarming. It's going to reach a point where Hezbollah will have to rethink its strategy and sort of assess whether or not it's worth it for them to even continue doing this if Israel's just going to continue striking them. And as we've seen already, according to the army's assessments, Hezbollah hasn't been able to regroup on the border area. In the past, all the Lebanese villages on the border were all full of Hezbollah infrastructure, tunnels and weapons caches and rocket launchers and everything you can think of. Israel demolished all of that during the ground offensive, has continued to strike and carry out ground operations as well to remove any remaining infrastructure there. And Hezbollah hasn't even tried to approach the areas to regroup. They're mainly trying to regroup in areas north of the Litani River and some areas not so close to the border, because they understand that trying to do that in the border area is impossible, and Israel will do everything and strike at every opportunity. And Israel is showing with these strikes, and it's important to note that not all of these strikes are in South Lebanon. We saw strikes just over the weekend as well against a Hezbollah missile production facility in the Bekaa Valley in northeastern Lebanon. We saw strikes several months ago in Beirut targeting drone manufacturing sites. Israel's going for every attempt by Hezbollah to regroup. And right now, the goal is to prevent them from regrouping and rearming. And the much further goal, which can only really be done by Lebanon itself, is to force the terror group to give up its weapons.
Right. And I want to pick up on what you just said now, that Hezbollah, unlike Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah lives inside a different sovereign nation. And I wanted to ask you, how much is Lebanon, the Lebanese forces, how much are they actually picking up the slack now, which was also built into the ceasefire deal?
So Israel's actually seen quite a good improvement with the Lebanese armed forces working to enforce the ceasefire. So there's a committee which is chaired by the United Nations and has representatives from France, Lebanon, Israel, and UNIFIL. And each side can lodge complaints through it. So from what the army told us is that Israel has filed 1,280 complaints. Not all of them were complaints that Israel asked Lebanon to enforce, but 670 were. Where Israel basically told the Lebanese army, here's a rocket launcher, go pick it up. And another 530 were cases where the IDF carried out a strike and then reported the violation. Afterwards, it's just logged there. No one's asked to enforce it because Israel already did enforce it with a strike. So of the 670, according to the IDF, the Lebanese army actually dealt with 456. 80 the IDF dealt with airstrikes, and then 18 were basically dismissed for being irrelevant for all sorts of reasons. So Israel is seeing the Lebanese army act and improving. It's not as fast as Israel would like to see in some cases, and it does have to resort to airstrikes. But in general, we are seeing this mechanism working in some ways.
And the other big game changer is, of course, the war with Iran. And Iran is the one who built up Hezbollah. And so is the assessment now that Iran is just incapable of continuing to nourish its proxy?
So Iran is continuing to try and supply Hezbollah weapons. It's very, very difficult for them now. The fall of the Assad regime in Syria has completely cut off Lebanon. The route that used to go from Iran to Lebanon is non-existent anymore because the new Syrian government is not, or even actively working against these smuggling attempts. But Iran is probably still supplying Hezbollah with cash, with money in various routes, which is something that's difficult for Israel to combat. It's something the Lebanese state needs to combat more. But it wouldn't surprise me if Iran is still trying to supply Hezbollah. But I think it's also important to think that during the war in Iran, Hezbollah did not come to Iran's help at all. We even know from the army that Naim Qassem, the Hezbollah Secretary General who replaced Nasrallah, received several requests from Iran during the war in June to join. They weren't orders really, but they were requests, and he received several of them, and he declined, and he basically refused to join. And the army assesses that sort of Hezbollah is, first of all, has low confidence to act against Israel and more focused on trying to regroup and restore, but also it's sort of making its own assessments, its risk reward assessments, whether or not it's worth it to try and attack Israel or to try and instead focus on restoring the capabilities.
And in terms of the capabilities, was there any kind of assessment of Hezbollah's arsenal right now? Because, of course, prior to all of this, we Israel were so afraid of the rockets, the missiles, the ballistic missiles, everything. So do you have any idea how much is left over?
Yeah, we have some numbers. In terms of the conscripted operatives, how many members of Hezbollah? So before the war, Hezbollah had around 25,000. Around 4,000 to 5,000 were killed, and another 9,000 are wounded enough that they're unable to fight. So that's about half of their force gone. And then the elite Radwan force, who were tasked with invading Israel, are dealing with around similar numbers. So of the 6,000 of their operatives, around half are eliminated or badly wounded. The rockets, 70 to 80%, the army claims to have destroyed. So if before the war they had 130,000 rockets and missiles aimed at Israel, Hezbollah is believed to have several thousand now, and the vast majority of them are short-range projectiles like mortars, which, of course, they can't fire from deep within Lebanon at Israel. They only have several hundred long-range rockets and missiles, the kind that can reach Tel Aviv and beyond, and that's down from thousands that they had before the war. So many of them were destroyed during the war and during the ground offensive.
Okay, let's close today with a little, let's call it a mini scandal in a way. And the military announced last week that it will commute the sentences of 3 soldiers of the Nahal infantry brigade who were disciplined for insubordination after refusing to return to fight in Gaza. So we're talking about 3, maybe 4 soldiers in this particular incident. But the question is, Manny, is this the beginning of something bigger? Do you see this as a trend that may grow?
It could be, but I'm not sure yet. We haven't seen any other examples yet. But I do think the context is important, that the standing army is sort of going through a bit of a crisis. We've talked a lot about how reservists have to leave their families and serve for months on end, and it's very difficult. And we've talked about that a lot, not just us, but in Israel, there's a lot of conversation about reservists. But everyone sort of seems to forget the standing army, soldiers who were drafted 2 years ago. The only thing they know is war. They did their basic training and they were immediately sent to Gaza. And the Nahal Brigade, for example, they've been fighting in Gaza for 2 years. Sometimes some of their units have been sent to the West Bank for a bit. I don't think they were sent up north, maybe only for a short while. But they've been fighting for 2 years, and some of these soldiers just can't do it anymore. And these 3 soldiers who they basically told their commanders that they can't fight anymore. They can't return to Gaza. Several of their comrades were killed. Some of them are survivors of very serious incidences. One of them, I think, was even wounded himself and returned afterwards to duty. And they told their commanders, we can no longer serve. And the army, of course, dismissed them from combat duty for insubordination and sentenced them to prison. But because of this outcry from protest groups and from the families and other journalists as well, the IDF decided to commute their prison sentences. Instead, they will basically need to stay on base for a long time. It's called rituk in Hebrew, normally 2-3 weeks staying on base. And they'll be sent to other non-combat roles in the army. And the IDF also pledged to, support them with, mental health officers and everything else that they may need. But I think it is a big problem that the standing army is going to see itself going through soon. There are, I'm sure, many other soldiers like them who are finding it very difficult to continue fighting, and especially with a lot of talk of extending the mandatory service as well, because of trying to ease the sort of the situation with the reservists and the fact that the IDF is not really managing to draft the Haredi community, or the majority of them, to the army. I think it's very difficult for the standing army, and I've met with soldiers and they've definitely said this. But a lot of them have said we'll continue fighting no matter what if the army needs us. But I'm sure there are others who are finding it very, very difficult. And in a case like this, I think the IDF needs to maybe be a bit more sensitive towards these soldiers instead of just immediately sending them to jail for this, and maybe look into it a bit more, see what the circumstances are.
Yeah, it sounds like all's well that ends well kind of story. The soldiers didn't get prison time, but being demoted to non-combat roles has a huge ripple effect on their future. Actually, it reduces their pay, it reduces the number of grants they're going to get. Even mortgages, I believe, are affected. Their university scholarships will be affected. It's a huge deal, actually, to be demoted in this way. And so, yes, the question is, will the army actually be able to prevent these situations versus just putting another patch on the situation once it appears? And are you hearing anything about an increase of mental health manpower just to be available for all of these soldiers who are serving so much?
The IDF has been trying since the beginning of the war, of course, to increase this. I think at one point they had 800 mental health officers in reserves drafted along, on top of all the ones that are in the standing army. They've sent mental health officers to Gaza to speak with troops instead of having them to come out and meet mental health officers. The army has a response for this, but it's not always as efficient as can be. And of course, the army's in the middle of a war, and not everything is exactly as it should be. And sometimes it takes a few, I don't want to call them mistakes, but the army does need to sort of, it goes wrong in places, it investigates, and then it fixes itself up afterwards. It's not just with mental health, it's with everything, with all their fighting. That's how the army normally learns. We can sit back here and judge them, but sometimes it's not always that simple for the army to sort of figure these things out.
For sure, for anyone. All right, Manny, thank you for that lesson in humility as well on Tisha B'Av. Very important day to remember such things. Thanks for joining me today, Manny.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves, and if you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.